Thank you for having me here. My name is Krzysztof Romanowski, but usually most of the people know me calling me Roman. I'm lead engineer at Roche in RDI GTM. I administer and develop machine learning platform based on Kubeflow in a wider perspective of data analysis platform. And I wanted to share some insights on the authentication and authorization routine for Kubeflow based on oauth2-proxy and explain how everybody can easily experiment with it. And I see that my screen is now sharing and visible, so I'll just jump right in. We only have 15 minutes. So what's it going to be about? What's the story? So what actually pushed us to go to investigation for oauth2-proxy? What are the differences? If there is something else to oauth2-proxy, and actually there is some dedicated envoy filter called oauth2-HTTP. What the general auth process looks like from the perspective of current setup and this proposed setup. And then how would you start if you'd like to use oauth2-proxy with Kubeflow just right now? So let's jump with what's the story. Over a year ago, we had this scenario where we wanted to unify authentication not only for Kubeflow, which we already had for, I think, over a year, but also to other services that we wanted to start adding to the platform, the ecosystem that we created there. And we also wanted to integrate SSO. And at this certain time, mind you, this was back in 1 year back ago, this certain setup lacked of the feature for using JVTs, configure access based on groups, but not only the Kubeflow, as I mentioned, we also want to use this setup for other services, and then also lack of end-to-end tokens. And some additional extra configuration would be required to have that setup, Kubeflow authentication setup connected to other services. And then also we figured that it would be nice to use the refresh tokens. So as far as I know, after this year, OIDC Auth service provides end-to-end tokens and some support for JVT. As far as I remember, it still operates based on Kubeflow authentication header, which is Kubeflow user ID. So even though OIDC Auth service can understand JVT, it doesn't actually provide that then on the cluster. And then we figured, okay, Istio supports integration with JVT natively. How do you configure Istio to actually understand and see the JVT? You can send it in just authorization header with the standard name Authentication, as far as I remember, or you can configure some middleware. So this middleware actually currently is OIDC Auth service. But because we really wanted to integrate with JVT, or actually, I think I should be calling JOTS. Yeah, let's start calling it JOTS. So yeah, oauth2-proxy has support for JOTS. And then how to improve configuration of Istio in a way that this setup works better on a whole mesh config scale. So it's not only for Kubeflow, but you can use it in a wider perspective. This is where this envoy oauth2-HTTP dedicated authentication filter comes in. So what are the differences? I put this little table here. So the difference between this and envoy filter, well, the use case. The dedicated filter is, well, the dedicated filter. This is easier to use that, and the use case is specifically for that. Configuration, it's really straightforward, while in envoy filter you have all of the possibilities. It's sometimes it's actually hard not to break something when you operate on envoy filters. The performance, dedicated filter is optimized for external authentication checks, because this is what it was supposed to do. With envoy, again, it might have some implications depending on how you do the raw configuration de facto. The maintenance, this dedicated filter evolves with authorization needs, while for envoy filter, this is kind of a custom thing from Istio perspective, so there is some maintenance involved. And the compatibility, because this is supported by both natively in Istio and envoy, we can feel pretty much secure when it comes to compatibility. But then when it comes to envoy filter, future updates of Istio on Envoy might break these customizations. So this is about this dedicated filter and Envoy filter. When it comes to oauth2-proxy and oauth2 service, I tried to put the most important points. And here I also want to say oauth2 service by itself is not a bad service. In Kubeflow, it was used for those few years right now with quite a success, but maybe just that there is more. So for oauth2-proxy, it certainly brings maturity and community. It's also a more general tool for authentication middleware. It's more flexible. It also supports end-to-end tokens. It also supports refresh tokens. A nice bonus that I very much like is that you can integrate oauth2-proxy with Redis for security and performance, which basically means those JVTs will not be sent within the authorization cookie. It will be stored in Redis as a value, and then just the key to this Redis value will be sent to your cookie, which is useful if you want to have groups, because if you store JVT in a cookie and you have a lot of groups for that user in the JVT, you can hit a size limit for the cookie. So in summary, Envoy, maybe let me just quickly jump here. Pro oauth2 service, basically it already works, so you don't have to do anything. But again, it works mostly based on these authentication headers, which is not ideal for more of a production setup when you want to have not only Kubeflow on your environment. So right, this dedicated filter brings quite powerful improvements, at least that's my opinion. To fully utilize this dedicated filter, it's worth integrating with oauth2-proxy instead of oauth2 service because of this JVT token. Because once you have it, then you can basically say, if there is this specific claim in this JVT, and it can be about groups, it can be about some organizational details, email as well, you have pretty much powerful authorization routine. But for example, for the example setup of Kubeflow, it's not like you definitely need that. So you shouldn't worry at this point if something is wrong with my setup. But then for integrating Kubeflow into more of a production environment, it brings benefits. So now a little bit on the authentication process. I wanted to put a little bit oversimplified diagram that should be fine, I guess. So let's imagine how the workload goes like. First, we have user going to Istio through Istio Ingress Gateway, which is a load balancer. And then we have Envoy filter that knows authorization should go through oauth2 service. It does its magic, and then it goes back with the header, the dedicated header for Kubeflow. And then you can do your authorization routine based on that header, which is pretty much okay, right? But how does it look like when you bring oauth2-proxy? So the first difference is that to configure this filter, the dedicated filter, you actually have to use meshconfig extension provider. And it's not a bad thing. Configuring meshconfig, it actually provides you with the ability to configure your authentication through custom providers. And this provider in this scenario would be just oauth2-proxy. And then it says, before I authorize further, I need to verify if oauth2-proxy agrees that this traffic should go. And then oauth2-proxy does its magic. Part of that is by asking DEX to log in such user. Part of that would be if there is authorization header already in the traffic, it should be just verified and used. For this is additional configuration. It's not like every job then should be trusted. You have to specify which issuer from which oauth2 service will and is trusted to use this specific token. But at the end, oauth2-proxy will always bring back the JVT claim along with its response. It can be additionally configured. Well, this response, once sent back from oauth2-proxy to Istio, as mentioned, it has the JVT claim. Now we can use request authentication to say, hey, I know that JVT, this issuer, let's use it now within Istio, which then says, okay, I can get to these claims within JVT, and based on those JVTs and also the header. But the header here comes along, but not exactly from oauth2-proxy. It comes from the request authentication, because we have multiple possibilities of configuration. First, use JVT. Second, extract claims from the JVT and just put them to the specific headers. And then if you provide this on the Istio root namespace, this is cluster-wide configuration, and it integrates pretty nicely. And then at the end authorization policy that's closest to your Kubeflow services, you still have the same possibilities to configure your authentication, and you still have possibility to use JVT for Kubeflow or for something else if you have some integrations. How to start using oauth2-proxy with Kubeflow? Basically, there is a pull request currently. We had some discussion over last month or two with Kubeflow manifest community. This is already usable. The current status is that, as far as I know, it shouldn't be a part of release 1.8, but maybe it should be a part of 1.9. We will see in future, but I see the interest, so I think it will make a living here. To talk about the most important stuff, well, it provides capabilities over customized components, and those can be picked in combination. First component is the one that actually configures your Istio mesh config with this dedicated filter. Other to configure Istio and oauth2-proxy to use end-to-end tokens. Other one to configure central dashboard to use oauth2-proxy logout URL. Configure Kubernetes to allow unauthenticated requests to the OIDC discovery service. This is pretty much important because OIDC in default Kubernetes installation for Kubernetes in Docker, vCluster, they will also always have in-cluster OIDC issuer. So there is some configuration. It's not that hard to configure, but it needs just a little bit. It's also automated in here. And then the README on the setup and other components and instruction on how to install with oauth2-proxy. This PR is available here. It's the same name. You should be able to find that out. And if you were to test that setup for yourself, the steps are pretty simple. You can just get the pull request, modify this example customization YAML file. But because the modification is pretty much simple, it's described in the README, in the description of the PR and in the READMEs inside the PR. You can do it with a single command. It's also added to the READMEs. And then testing end-to-end is just as simple as creating some pod inside the cluster that has CURL, and then calling the Istio load balancer with this specific authorization header that we can just take from the service account token. And then we are calling this API workgroup exists. It's just so it gives us this really simple response saying that, well, a few of the fields, but the most important one is user. User is system service account default, which is just the ID of our service account. And thus we reached the possibility to use end-to-end tokens with service accounts, or technically any OIDC provider that you want to set up like that. So that's all. Thank you very much. I doubt we have any time for questions, but I can also answer them on Slack. I already saw one question from Nitin, so I will try to answer that. Thank you very much. And that's all, folks.